Hello, everybody, and welcome to the South Asian session of the People's Food Summit. I'd like to start this session where we'll give a snapshot of India, and we will also later talk about Sri Lanka going 100% organic. And I'd like to introduce you to our first speaker, someone who I regard as a dear friend. And we were on the world board together in iFarm Organics International, and he runs what I regard as one of the most innovative and important programs in the world. It's Matthew John, and it's called Last Forest, and he works with indigenous forest dwellers. We could say some of the most probably endangered people on the planet, along with their forests, their culture, and knowledge. And what Matthew is doing with Last Forest to me is very important, that taking neglected people and empowering them and actually making sure that these people, their knowledge and the fact and their forests still survive and have a future. So Matthew, I'll hand it over to you now.
Thank you so much, Andre. It's such a pleasure to join up with you and with the others. Um, I was just talking to Bablu earlier, and I was just wondering how you are managing this 24 hours. You're there in every panel leading off, and across continents, across people from different organizations and different contexts. But this session is a great session, close to my heart, and especially when we talk of indigenous people and we talk of local markets. All of us, in our own ways, we all want to change the world, and we make a huge effort. But something that we all hesitate many times is to engage with the market. You know, we're very comfortable doing research. We're very comfortable doing a lot of writing work and all of that. But engaging with the market, which is very ruthless, and making that work is a very mainstream effort. But I think it needs to be done, because if we want the communities to have a place, to have a voice, I think we also need to engage with the market. Yeah, and so in all our work, when you look at indigenous communities, they're a very small subset of people. You look at mountain systems, that's really not on the radar for most people. It's not there for politicians. And so when we have policies made, policies are made keeping in context people, the larger population, the mainstream population. And so we have such a mishmash of policies, and suddenly that needs to be applicable for this small set of mountain people, and in that a very small subset of indigenous communities. Many times when we talk of indigenous communities and we talk and we discuss, most of the time we look at farming when we are talking in our organic world. And when we are talking of food, we're always talking about what comes of farm systems. But what we forget about is that this set of people who are in forest areas, they are collecting a huge number of forest items. And many of these are not recognized. And if I give you the example of honey, that's something that we work with day in and day out. Most people will always talk about honey which comes from bee boxes, but we never talk about honey which is collected from the wild. We never understand how honey is collected in the wild. And we then do not give them the value and the space that they need to be provided for us to recognize the effort that they put in to bring us this produce. And so it's sometimes it's so much more complex. When you're farming, you are on your own piece of land, but when you are collecting forest produce, you have many more challenges. You also have to deal with the state. You have to deal with the forest department, and in many of these areas, the forest department continues to be such a large role player, and these communities have to struggle to deal with that. And when they bring that out and bring it onto our plate, sometimes we need to be able to provide them that value for that. And so I share something that what we've been working on in this area, and it's not last forest. What Andre was talking about is maybe a front facing institution. It's a social enterprise, but we, in all our work, we constantly realize that we need an ecosystem of institutions that are able to address different needs. So there is a civil society organization that is able to deal with a lot of development work that needs to be done. We have a separate farmer producer company which needs to deal with capacity building, training, processing, and all of that. And then we have last forest, which deals with the market, and that market portion also requires a lot of effort. Is branding, packaging, value addition, and all of that. And I think it's the ecosystem of institutions that make this possible. Over the last year, and I'm going back to constantly going back to honey as a reference, is because it helps to us to understand things better. Is I've seen this mindset change in customers. Earlier when we brought honey to the market, the first question when you see it, and for most customers, when they see it from small enterprises or small businesses, they will ask, is the honey processed? Where is the honey processed? What kind of machinery are you using? Just over the last year or two, the entire thing has changed. Now the first question customers ask is the honey raw? Is the honey unprocessed? And you see, we have now customers who are beginning to see a difference, and who are wanting products which are much more natural and not the processed variety, because they know now what the impacts have been, what they have gone through over the last few years, and their priorities are shifting. I just hope that this shift will remain in the minds. We all have very short memories. Yeah. I think I want to add here is when we're talking of small producers, we're talking of food. I think we constantly, and this is a conversation that we had with Andre, and it has just stuck with me, is that when we compare prices as customers, we are constantly talking about how processed food which is on the shelf is much lower in price. And when we are talking, and Andre said, are we ready to pay the true cost of food? And that has stuck with me. And every time I talk to people and I talk about that, and I say, are we willing to pay that the true cost of food? Because if we have to have food on our table, we have to have a set of people who are happy. Farmers, harvesters, they need to be happy. They need to be happy not only for themselves, but for that next generation of people who they will hand the baton over to. Do they want their children to be farmers and harvesters? Most of the time, 99%, it will be a no. And if we have to shift this mindset, I think we need to be able to make that statement ourselves as customers. Are we willing to make that change? And so I want to leave that here with us as we go forward in this discussion, is that we as customers, people who also work with communities, that we need to make this transition to be able not only to be able to take these products out into the market, but also as customers to be willing to pay that true cost of food that is on our plate. Yeah. So thank you, Andre, for this time, and I hope if there are any questions, happy to take them on at the end.
Yeah, we'll have questions at
Yeah.
the end of this session. But look, Matthew, thank you so much. And as someone who's actually been to the Nilgiris, stayed at your place and seen what you're doing, I think it is so inspirational. And the fact is, I think when you talked about the fact people are now asking, is it processed? Is it natural? We are winning. We are changing the conversation, and that is very important. And talking about changing the conversation, I want to go to another good friend of mine, Sandeep Kamath, who's one of our global leaders in biodynamics and definitely a leader in India in the biodynamic movement. Sandeep, I'll hand it over to you now if you'd like to talk. Just see if you can load up your slides. If you can't, I can do it from here. You're on mute, Sandeep. You're on mute. You have to unmute.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Andre. Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yep, you sound a lot
Great.
better like that.
Yeah, great. Thanks. So really privilege and honor to be with, Andre, you, Bablu, and Matthew Yan, as well as Ranil. So today I would just like to take, our viewers today through a little bit about biodynamics and why I'm so passionate and excited about it. Even though being a kind of a world system, how in India, we have really how it gets localized to each kind of place. And my presentation is more, it's more about just some talking points with very few pictures, and I've converted into PDF like you asked. So hopefully that works better. Can you see this now, Andre?
No, we can't. You've got to. Oh, yeah, we can now. It's fantastic. Yeah, it's just a little
Great.
bit of a delay.
Sure. Okay. So what is biodynamics for some of you who have not heard of it? It's a holistic, ecological, ethical, and a spiritual regenerative approach to farming, gardening, food, and nutrition. And it is based on 8 lectures which a philosopher and scientist called Dr. Rudolf Steiner gave, which is now currently Poland. And that time it was old Europe, it was some other country. And in 1924. And the interesting part about this is this happened just a decade after commercial fertilizers were introduced during the end of the First World War. So already within 10 years of using commercial fertilizers, farmers in Europe started seeing soil fertility dropping. They started seeing the seeds were not lasting that long. There was foot and mouth disease, and Rudolf Steiner gave these lectures to. It was called the spiritual renewal for agriculture, and the international biodynamic movement has really been at this forefront of the carbon sequestration, animal health, food quality, and preservation of local varieties to help regenerate the earth. It has continued to develop and evolve since the 20s through collaboration of many farmers and researchers. Around the world, it lives in hundreds of thousands of gardens, farms, plantations, vineyards, ranches, and orchards. And the best part, what I really like, is the principles and practices, which I'll touch on, can be applied anywhere where food or even cotton. I work with a cotton project now in Tamil Nadu, or flowers, and to adoption to scale, landscape, climate, and culture. And here is one of the pictures I'm quite excited about. If you see this brinjal root of these two pictures, photos here was taken at a farm in Chennai. And on the left, you have organic hybrid seed, which is available in any shop or seed shop. This was planted next to each other by mistake, and it was not a planned research; it just happened. And this seed is available anywhere. And look at the roots of the one on the left. And next to it was a seed, a native variety seed, of a brinjal plant. And just look at the roots here. And this is what we believe from biodynamics, that keeping the spirit or the genus loci, keeping these local breeds, we can really bring for this current climate resilient agriculture. This is what we need for the climate. We need seeds like this, which of course biodynamics helps the roots grow better, but the local variety of seeds will even make the roots go even deeper. And this is really climate resilience, example of climate resilience. One of the other things which we do with biodynamics is give a lot of focus on biodiversity to have it on all our farms. And in India, as you know, Andre, there are many small farmers. And if you have an acre or 2 acres and you tell them, 10% of your farm you have to leave for biodiversity, it is a loss of production for them and it's very difficult. So what we have is we can have uh, sacred groves, which we see again the cotton project I refer to. In many villages, we have these places, sometimes near the temple, where the villagers kind of look at it as a holy place, like a religious place. These groves, and that we kind of consider that as part of the farm, even though it's not in the farm, but it's adjoining between two farmers. And this is a very good way for biodynamics to really meet this biodiversity component into the farm, and the villagers really look after it. They look after it commonly. There are about 14,000 which have been reported, but many experts say there are more than 100,000 of these sacred groves in India, and they are really hotspots for all the birds and the insects to really pollinate there, to have their nests there, to really breed over there. And recently, it's about a couple of years ago, the Indian government brought this under the Wildlife Protection Act. So all these sacred groves also are now protected by law. So I'll just touch briefly on what are the principles and practices of biodynamics generally and how it comes more to India. Some of these things we talked about. We really look at the farm as a whole living organism, which is the interplay between the farmer, who's the ego of the farm, the conductor, you could say, to the orchestra, and the orchestra is all the plants and the animals of the plant, and it really cultivates biodiversity. We talked about, we really try to bring the plants and animals together, which is very easy in India because, as you know, even the conventional farmers have cows. So if you're an Indian farmer, 9 out of 10 you would have a cow. 9 farmers out of 10 would have a cow. We really encourage on-farm fertility and to make sure that the farmers don't have any dependence on outside inputs. So we try to teach them all the biodynamic inputs, what they can make themselves. And we try to cultivate awareness to really talk about the projects, to let the consumers know, like what Matthew also shared about, that really where is your food coming from, and all the tough work which they do to get that. And like I shared earlier, we really try to support the integrity and diversity of the local seeds and breeds. We have some sprays, biodynamic sprays, which really enhance the soil and plant health. And that is the approach which is for pests and diseases, a very holistic approach, because we look at all the pests and diseases as weeds, even as messengers, and how we can strengthen the soil, and by strengthening the soil, we strengthen the plant. And like I showed you the picture of that Indian native hybrid brinjal seed, those kind of seeds can really take care of any pest. And even with climate change, if there's less rain or more rain, because of their deep root system, they can really manage that. We treat animals with respect, which also echoes with a lot of farmers here. The only one trend here in India, which is quite disturbing now, is they've started cutting off the horns of the cows, and we are trying to kind of stop that. And we respect the integrity of the animal, that no tail mutilation, no cutting of horns should happen. And one of the two things very unique to biodynamics is that we also work with the rhythms of the seasonal rhythms, watch the seasonal crops, but also the rhythms of the cosmos, the rhythms of the earth, all the moon rhythms. And this is very exciting, and it finds great resonance with farmers because they can remember from their grandfathers and from their ancestors having these planting almanacs, which really, it's, in India, astrology is quite deep, and people can very easily relate to that, and really offers regenerative solutions for the future. And this is a small picture of, we have a federation, a very democratic federation, which is for all our member organizations around the world. These farmers and these hectares are certified, but for India, for example, we estimate there are about 100,000 farmers practicing some form of biodynamics, using some inputs or using the planting calendar, the biodynamic planting calendar. And this is based on the sales of the biodynamic preparations we have and from our association. Also, another thing is the certification for biodynamics is called Demeter. Uh, it is it is much beyond the plain vanilla national standards in many ways. One way is the history. It is the oldest standard in the world. It was set up in 1928. So, in a few years from now, we'll have 100 years of certification. I don't think many people are there. Also, it has restrictions on getting a lot of inputs onto the farm. It generates, like we talked about, on-farm fertility. Even livestock, that as much of your livestock should be fed from your produce on the farm and not to import some. It has a biodiversity requirement. And the whole farm has to be certified, not like many other standards where you can certify a part of your farm as organic and the other part not. But in the biodynamic, the whole farm has to be certified. And also, we take very big care that the product is certified. So that means even the process is certified, and we are a bit stringent on that as well. Also, we look at it, like you said, holistically. So from really a field to plate approach, a food system approach to really get consumers to know whether the consumers are in Europe, whether it's exported. Like we sell a mango juice from India, where the farmer pictures on the bottle so they know where their food is coming from. And have community supported agriculture. Many farms in India, we don't have so many yet, just a few. But in many countries like Germany and America, a large part of the biodynamic farms are community supported agriculture. And really, this fraternity, building a kind of brotherhood in the trade. And the mango example I gave about is a 30-year relationship. We have a tea estate which went Demeter in the mid 80s, and they are still supplying to the same customer in UK. So really building this brotherhood in the economic, in the business sphere. And I would just like to end with this last slide. Steiner also said that anybody who's kind of a leader or wants to work in agriculture should do farming. Unlike me, I'm not a farmer, but I'm very proud that in this international biodynamic movement, a majority of the leadership, is farmers, active farmers or retired farmers who are full-time farmers. And these are some few people. Petra heads our advisory, research, and training for the Demeter International, and she's a Dutch lady who's farming now in North Germany. At the bottom left, you have Christoph Simpfendorfer, who was 30 years a biodynamic farmer in Stuttgart, and now he's a general secretary. Uli Hutter from Switzerland is the leader of the agriculture section, and he is a dairy farmer in Switzerland. And on the top right is Sadman Patel, who was president and one of the best farms in India. He was the president, our past president. Our current president of the Biodynamic Association is also a farmer. So those were a glimpse of biodynamics overall and how it is from the Indian perspective.
Sandeep, thank you very much. I think it was a very good overview of biodynamics in India and globally, so thank you. And now I'd like to introduce another friend, Bablu Ganguly, who runs an award-winning, how can you say, food marketing system for Timbuktu. And also, Bablu is now Vice President of iFoam Organics International. And I want to say congratulations, Bablu, and I think it's wonderful that you're a Vice President. Well deserved. We know now the organic world is in good hands. I think with you and Julia in Argentina and Karen in the Pacific, you got a great executive board. So anyway, Bablu, I'll hand it over to you now to talk about Timbuktu, please. Your mic, you have to unmute, Bablu. Otherwise you don't sound that good.
Thank you, Andre. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I am so fascinated with how you guys are running this 24-hour program. It's quite fascinating. I've been listening to some of the Facebook, through Facebook, some of the programs from 12:30, and it's been quite interesting. So I am actually neither an intellectual nor a I'm a simple grassroots worker, and I've been working in the villages of Andhra Pradesh for the last, Andhra Pradesh is in South India, for the past 43 years. So about 30 years ago, my partner Mary and I, we started the Timbuktu Collective with a few friends, and it's a not-for-profit organization, and it's called the Timbuktu Collective. The collective now works with about 25,000 families in 185 villages. Our work is based on the concept of regeneration of the local economy. I mean, that's the basic aspect of our work. But we also work on the revival of the local ecology and culture, of restoration of pride of the local artisans, smallholder farmers, agricultural laborers, and honey gatherers, Matthew. We also have been working on the conservation of wilderness and the commons. So primarily, we have organized about 24,000 women into 4 cooperatives that run as alternative banks, with about 350 million rupees as their capital. They support the local agriculture and help the local businesses. Basically, this is to revive the local economy. We have been working from among these families with about 2,000 smallholder farmers who grow organic produce on about 12,000 acres of land. They're formed into a cooperative that processes, value adds, packages, markets these products as in the brand name of Timbuktu Organic, which is now quite well known in South India and has a annual revenue of about 50 million rupees. We have partnered with, again, 11 villages to protect, regenerate, and conserve about 10,000 acres of common lands, wasted lands, into a wilderness that now houses over 300 species of flora, distinct species of flora of grasslands. Ours is a grassland ecology, a savanna grassland ecology, and it has about 300 species of flora, about 24 species of wildlife that fall under what's known as Schedule 1 of the Wildlife Act, which the animals that are going extinct. It has 123 bird species, distinct bird species, and 22 mammalian and 28 herpofauna species. This is also the main watershed for 7 large rainwater harvesting bodies, and therefore with the forest coming back on these 10,000 acres, there's a large chunk of land that is being brought under, has a lot of water now. Other than that, I mean, of course, there are many other things. All of those are related, basically, what I was trying to say, to the whole principle of regeneration. And whether it's the economy, whether it's the forest, whether it's the land, whether it's the animals, all our work is based on the principle of regeneration and revival and restoration. Personally, I have recently embarked on a new journey. I am trying to build a agroforest habitat, a food forest on a 100-acre farm that will house a intentional community and a learning center for regenerative agriculture, permaculture, and biodynamics for local young people. That's about what I do. If there are any questions, I can answer them later.
Okay. Well, Bablu, thank you very much. And when you say that's just about all you do, it's not much at all, is it? It's quite incredible. And I suppose what I love actually, is the larger concept of regeneration. It's not just about soil organic matter. It's about whole ecosystems and the communities in those ecosystems. And that is exactly, I suppose, what we're about. We need to regenerate our communities, our democracy, our participation, our empowerment, our ecosystems, our marketing systems. We have so much we have to regenerate. And it's so good that, I suppose, here that it's being done. And I think what I really like from the three of you is the fact that is exactly what you're doing in India, and showing such, well, I'll call it global leadership. That's why I wanted you to be speakers tonight. So we've still got a few minutes before we get on to the next section, which is, Sri Lanka going organic. So are there any questions from the participants you'd like to ask our speakers? I think what we always find is we get the questions after the time is finished. So I suppose I'll start with a question. I think with Bablu, I'm very interested in your approach in actually regenerating whole ecosystems. That to me, and I suppose the other one, which I think is really important, what we see in a lot of the world, one of the problems is this concept of wilderness and disconnecting the traditional owners, the indigenous people who live there, with it. And Matthew, you've probably answered this as well. How do you regenerate it, and at the same time, make sure that the traditional owners are part of that, and really, you could say, the custodians of that ecosystem?
Absolutely. I mean, if they are not if they are not the custodians, then who are? This is a problem that we face in India, because, I mean, of course, Matthew can talk about the forests, because at least they are recognized to some extent in the Indian landscape. But the lands that I'm talking about is what's called Perambok. Perambok means waste. I cannot imagine how a piece of land can ever be waste. But the British decided to mark these lands as wastelands because they did not generate revenue. And because they did not generate revenue for the British, they were of no use to them. So it was great for the local communities. It became their common lands. There were the grazing lands, and Anantapur district, where I'm working, has possibly one of the largest small ruminant populations in the whole country, and that's because we have so much of this so-called wasteland. But unfortunately, after 1947, when we had our own government, this became no man's land. And slowly it started getting destroyed. So you can imagine, in Anantapur district, we had 11% forest area. Forest area meaning bush forest, the savanna area. Today we have 1%. I mean, it was completely destroyed. And the people have no right over it. So what we did was we started organizing the villages. We spoke to this one village who agreed to protect 125 acres of land. This was almost 25 years ago. And then one by one, all the surrounding villages said, hey, we also want to do this. We also want to do this. And that's how we got 12,000, there's 7,500 acres that is contiguous land. And another 2,500 acres to the side, and this whole thing is being protected by the people of 11 villages. So they just took it over. And now the government wants to sell it off to windmills and people who want to set up resorts and things like that. I mean, we are fighting it, but the people technically have no right over it. They only have right because they have protected it, conserved it, So I'm really scared that any day we may lose the right to do anything. So what
Keep up,
we've
Yeah.
so keep up the fight, Bubbly. That's what you got to do. I just want to ask Matthew, because you're in the same situation working with traditional forest dwellers, and about the whole issue of conserving those forests and the cultures that go with it.
Yeah, so adding on, so I think this very distinct thing of once we got our independence, and I think what happened when the British left is they created something which was a homogeneous, not homogeneous, a ecosystem that was in harmony got completely disturbed by the way the land was classified. Yeah, so we have created this biosphere reserve, which is across three states having completely different local regulations. How can you suddenly ask these communities who have lived all their lives in such a harmonious ecosystem suddenly to say you are allowed to collect, and if you step 5 steps another way, you are not allowed to collect? So you have completely smashed up the local ecosystem and now created it under different regulations. The whole thing. We have over 200,000 people living in this contiguous piece of forest, but they are all split in under different regulations, and it creates chaos for management, and for these communities, because suddenly what they're doing becomes illegal. Yeah, and then they have to hide from the state to be able to deal what was a normal practice for them. And so this stewardship thing, I think, is very important, because if we do not recognize them as part of this ecosystem and that they have rights, we actually, in our 50 60 years of independence, we have slowly lost land. And what Bablu was saying, from 11% is come down to 1%. So all the control that we wanted to create has actually not benefited anybody. So unless we put this power back in their hands. And so to some extent, the Forest Rights Act, which came up in early 2000, it has taken some time, but it is having its impact, because many of these communities now have official, rights over their areas. And so what was considered their ancestral domain today is being documented. You see, so they collected from certain areas, they did not collect from certain areas, and these were ecologically fragile areas, which the communities themselves perceived and allowed it to be. They in our parlance, we would call it that they are able to regenerate those areas, but they knew this as their heritage and as part of their culture for thousands of years. We are now sort of discovering it and providing new words to that. We have new words of gene pools. Yeah, but they understood the concept of a gene pool much better than all of us. And so if we do not understand and create space for these biodiverse communities, languages, cultures to coexist, we're trying to we are in for a lot of trouble. But hopefully we have some officers who are still patient, who hear out, and hopefully this tribe will grow, because we can't only have the civil society as part of this system of holding on to these areas. You have to have the communities, you have to have the civil society, and you have to have the state. Unless they all work together, it's a tough battle.
At least you're fighting the battle. And this is the really important thing, because this is an issue all around the planet, saving our forests.
Yeah.
And forests just aren't trees
Yeah.
and animals, they're also people. All those forests everywhere on our planet has had custodians, and we need to rethink it. So, but I think you're at the forefront of this battle, and you're the leaders of it. So I really want to thank you with that. And then I want to talk about another battle now it's a good one. And this is about Sri Lanka going 100% organic, and the president of Sri Lanka having a directive. And we have two of the leaders in this process as speakers today. And I'll introduce the first one, Dr. Reynold Senna Yaiki. Probably pronounced your name not so
All
well,
right.
but I'll just introduce you a bit, because I know you from analog forestry, but you've also been actively involved as a consultant for UNDP. One of the original pioneers of the organic sector back 50 years ago in University of California, Berkeley. One of the pioneers in Australia after that, and worked with NASA, and particularly in terms, NASA was one of the first certifiers in the world to use group certification of smallholder farmers. After that, you're in Europe, and now you're back in Sri Lanka and actively involved in what I think is one of the very exciting projects on this planet. So, Reynold, I'll hand it over to you, and let's hope we can get the technology to work.
Thank you, Andre. Thank you. Hello, all. Really good to be here. I'll begin to share my screen with you, and I'll tell you the story. The story basically is what we learned in Sri Lanka. And what we have learned here is that there is a tremendous danger in front of us. And unless we really, really understand the ecosystems in this detail that I'm going to tell you, right, we could be in serious trouble in the future. There's also a possibility coming out. I'll close with that. And this is going to be the gist of my talk. After which, Tilak will follow me. Tilak has been working very actively with all the groups, organic groups in Sri Lanka, and he will tell you how they have responded to the government directive. But first, for all of us, let me take you through a story. Let me share the screen. Okay, share screen. Share screen. Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. No, Okay, share screen. Why does it not share? Google, yes.
If you go to, just go to share screen, and if you go to window, if it comes up, if you see window, and then see if you can see there, there'll be a whole lot of little windows. Just click on your that's it. It's up now. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Entire screen. All right.
You've got it. That's great.
I got it, huh? Okay, here we go. Let me put this up. Tell me if this comes up. Can you see it?
Yes, it's coming up. It's just a bit slow, but it's all working. It's fantastic.
Great.
Sorry to hop in here, folks. This is my computer, so just let me know when to advance the slides if your screen doesn't appear to be working.
Oh,
okay. Can you see my screen now?
Next slide. Your screen isn't popping up. Just let me know when to advance the slides.
Just say next slide each time.
Okay. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay. Next slide. This is, whoops, sorry. Let me get this out. Okay. Okay, hold on. Cancer. All right, fine. Okay, Sri Lanka, as everybody, most of you know, it's an island. We have 103 recognized river watersheds draining radially. This means that there's not a single natural lake in the country. Yet, we have 32,000 artificial reservoirs dedicated to food production right around the mountains. This has gone on for over 3,000 years, and the rice agroecosystem was co-evolved with a supportive biodiversity. I've got a paper on this, and for people who are interested, we can go into that. We boasted 500 land races in 1940. Today, we are lucky if we get 20. The stability of the ecosystem and the diversity was basically lost with high energy input agriculture. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is what happened. This is the energy cost of modern food. You see on the right-hand side, the wild wheat or rice and the improved wheat or rice. This, we pay for the improvement through fossil energy. And this is what all of us are concerned about. This is what we've all been complaining about, the amount of fossil energy that goes into producing food. If you look at the left-hand side, look at how many fossil fuel calories go into producing food in those particular countries. And if we want to get in more and more developed into agriculture, well, we're going to change our food from biological material into fossil energy. So this is what's happening in front of us. Next, please. Yeah. Now, what happens is, with fossil, we move from low energy, high diversity food production systems, as you see on the left-hand side, to high energy, low diversity food production systems. This then entails a massive loss of biomass, whether it be the soil, whether it be the shrubs, whether it be the bushes, etc. around you in the ecosystem, that's all lost. The biomass crashes. Next slide, please. Okay, biomass, what is it? Biomass is the living skin. That's what we are all working on when we talk agriculture, organic, when we call biodynamic. This is what we work with, the living skin that maintains the life support system of this planet. There are two parts of this. One is the photosynthetic biomass, the green part that you can see. The other is the respiring biomass, the brown part. In this picture, what you can see is Amazonia. This is the Amazon forest. Right behind you, you see the great forest. They cut a few trees, they take it out, they reduce the biomass. Then they come out, all of a sudden there's hardly any trees. They take the remaining trees out, biomass is reduced again. Then they look at this and say, well, we can do agriculture on it. They take the top green material off and you're left with the soil, right? They put a crop in the soil, that gets eroded, and eventually what you see in front of you are the bare bones, right, without any living thing on it. This is the fate of the planet, and this is what we have to change. Next, please. Yeah, biomass. We must all understand what biomass is. If we are in agriculture, biomass is agriculture. We are all biomass, our plants are biomass, and understanding this is important because the food that we grow and consume is made possible by a specialized component of this biomass called photosynthetic biomass. Most of you would have learned this at school. Chlorophyll in a leaf takes carbon dioxide and water and catches the energy of the sunlight and turns it into sugars and oxygen. This is what is called primary productivity. This primary activity produces what are called primary ecosystem services. You would have heard stories about ecosystem services in doing all kinds of things, but the first ecosystem service that's created by life is the photosynthetic activity, and this is the creation of primary ecosystem services. Next slide, please. See, in the terrestrial ecosystems, chlorophyll, the primary ecosystem services, is performed by the leaves of trees. Once the leaves of trees fix the carbon, create the carbohydrates and sugars, then they're sent to the rest of the tree and biosynthesis begins. Lignin is produced, timber is produced, fruits are produced, flowers are produced. These are the secondary ecosystem services in an ecological context. Next slide, please. Now, in nature, biomass increases over time if undisturbed. You cut a forest and leave it alone, first there'll be bare ground. Then very slowly over time, herb fields and bushes will form. Then after a little while, the early cereal stage trees will come, the small trees. They create shade and they create deeper soil. Then a young forest forms, the old forest seeds come, etc. And finally, you get a mature forest. Remember, a forest is not just the mature part of just the trees. The forest is all of it. From the bare ground onward. If there were no grasses for the bare ground, then no more formation of the next stage. So a forest is a process. That is important to remember. Next slide, please. Now, there are human anthropogenic responses to serial succession, the creation of forests. So, the serial stage 1, annuals, we have agriculture. Agriculture, you grow annual crops, then you arrest the succession, you take it back, make the field again, next year put the same annual crop, and we have an arrested succession of the first serial stage. Then we look at this and say, oh, that's not enough, we need some trees in it. And we stick some trees in the farm, and we call it agroforestry. It's like the second serial stage. Trees are coming in. Then we look at that and say, oh, just a few trees is not good enough. We need shrubs and bushes and other things that give us more crops and give us diversity. You're moving into permaculture. Then you look at the natural forest and you say, no, but we want to be more like the forest. What's missing? And then you find what's missing are the epiphytes and the biodiversity parts of the mature forest, and you try to mimic that, and then you come to analog forestry. And this is the human response process to forest maturation. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is our restoration of wilding. On the left-hand side, you find the analog forest design. This was bare ground once. What we did was we copied the forest on the right-hand side, which is a natural forest. In the natural forest, there was hardly any crop species at all. There was only the native biodiversity. In the analog forest, there is 5 economic crops, and 60% of the original vertebrate fauna has returned back into the analog forest. So through design, you can bring back wilderness, and wilderness that supports human beings. And this is analog forestry. Next, please. Yeah. And if you go with analog tree-dominated designs, here's two different systems. One is a tree-dominated analog system that's on the left. There is coconut, there is rambutan, there is fruit trees, there is achiote for the shrubs. So this is an analog of a tree-dominated system. On the right, you see an annual crop system, but it's not just a monoculture, it's analogous to what might happen in nature in these fields. These systems give you a high B to B ratio, which means biodiversity to biomass. As your biomass increases, your biodiversity must increase. Next, please. See, we have to understand, all of us farmers, we must understand the relationship of our plants, the roots to the soil. Tree roots produce up to 20% of the total weight. That is, in 5 years, 100% of the entire heavy weight of the roots is the tree puts it into the surrounding soil. They do this because they want to create a dynamic soil ecosystem that supports them. 1 meter of trees roots has about 1 kilometer of fungal hyphae. Each species of tree has different chemical compounds that they put into the soil. That's why we need a diversity of trees. And many species of trees have distinct species of soil organisms with them. And the soil ecosystem itself is something we must be critically aware of. Next, please. And this is what the trees maintain, the roots. 1 gram of good soil, is forest soil or farmyard soil, 1 gram, enough to cover my thumbnail, will have in it 1 to 2 billion individual bacterial cells. Sharing the same gram, the same space with it are actinomycetes with populations of 100 to about 200 million individual cells. In the same gram, there are fungi, fungal hyphae, often over a kilometer of length if you put it end to end. There are hundreds of thousands of algal cells, thousands of nematodes, collemboles, microarthropods. Next slide, please. It's been estimated that the upper 15 centimeters of soil has about 7,000 kilograms of bacteria. If you put all of the total biomass of the upper 15 centimeters of soil, we have a mass of about 7,000 to about 14,000 kilograms of living organisms per hectare. This is the secret of organic agriculture, because this mass is equivalent to about 20 horses working day and night in your soil. The work is chemical transformation in the soil to create nutrients, to create safety for your plants and trees. This energy, about 20 horsepower day and night, is supplied if you have a living soil. When you put fertilizers, the diversity goes down, the mass goes down, the activity goes down, and from 20 horsepower, it goes down to 18, then it goes down to 12, 10. Eventually, the soil is dead. You cannot farm it without putting external inputs into it. This is why it's important to keep the living soil. Next slide, please. Yeah, the effectiveness of having a living soil is demonstrated here, because the fungal hyphae the mycelium network, for instance, increases the feeding surface of the roots, whether it be wheat or whether it be rice or whether it be mango tree, doesn't matter. It increases the active root surface for nutrient acquisition up to 700 times more than natural, just the root hair would do. Next, please. Right. Now, what is turning out, what we are finding out now, is that these fungi connect the roots of all forest trees and trees. Forest trees, different species, they allow trees to communicate with each other. We put labeled radioactive phosphorus in one end of a forest, and in 4 to 5 months, the phosphorus has been given to trees at the other end of the forest, maybe 2 to 3 kilometers away. So it shows the amount of underground communication that we are only now beginning to be aware of. Next slide, please. And now I'd like to leave the soil and go to what happens above the soil. All the water in the soil is polluted to one degree or another. Trees and plants use evapotranspiration to bring the polluted water from the ground through their leaves, and they release it into the air. Next, please. And trees and plants, therefore, They clean groundwater at the rate of about 50,000 liters per large tree and then puts this water into the global commons. So you can understand how much water is cleaned by the forests, cleaned by the plants, and given out into the global commons to create clean rain for us. This is an ecosystem service. Second, one of the primary ones to come out. Yes, next please. Now, an additional thing that happens is when transpiration happens, cooling happens. It has been calculated by USDA that a very large tree has the cooling equivalent of 10 room-size air conditioner units operating 8 hours a day. Now, this is equivalent to about 1,200,000 British thermal units of cooling. Now, when we take an acre of trees out, we reduce over 540 million British thermal units of cooling from a given area. Keep this in mind because this aspect is something we're going to come to because this is going to be critical to our future. Next, please. Right. Now, also, the leaves of plants is the photosynthetic biomass is the only system that maintains the global oxygen cycle. Look at the graphs below. The global carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is slowly going up, and the oxygen concentration is coming down. Now, at the moment, nobody addresses this. We are sending rockets, we are burning fossil fuel, we are putting nitrogen fertilizers, etc. And all this requires the burning and the use of oxygen. So again, this is a fundamentally important thing for all of us to keep in mind. Next, please. And what happens is, because of the fossil fuel burning, the temperature of the planet is now going up. And we all know what is going to happen. It is almost unstoppable now, and we must try and address it. Next, please. You see, the trend then with the temperature in every country is that we have more hot weather because the mean increases. So more record hot weather and less cold weather. In all countries, this is climate change, this is global warming, this is happening to us right now. Why it is critically important to all of us who are involved in food and food production is this. Can I have the next slide, please? This, and I showed you earlier, photosynthesis is what keeps us alive on the planet, which cleans the water, gives us oxygen, gives us food. Photosynthesis is made by chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is an enzyme, and an enzyme has optimum operating temperatures. For chlorophyll, it is about 37 to 39 degrees. As you pass that, it becomes to denature. Now, in most of our lands, North India, all those areas, Middle East, Australia, temperatures are exceeding 40. They're going close to 50. When that happens, food production stops. As the temperature goes up, productivity in agriculture goes down. And it comes to a point when it will crash and no more production. Heat stress. If we don't address this now, as agriculturists and people involved in food, the world is going to face a very difficult future because this is the certainty of climate change. What do we do? Next slide, please. You look at the soil, not only the air, you look at the soil. As the soil warms up, as the soil temperatures go up to about, 28, 30, 36, then earthworm activity starts to go down, many of the other soil organisms will not start to collapse. So this global warming, the increasing of temperature, is something that every agricultural person has to take into consideration and think about it, because it is going to affect the ability for us to produce food. Next slide, please. Now, what are the design considerations for the future food security? You have a broad acre farm, monocultures. Can they continue to feed the future? Because if the temperature rises uniformly, all the green fields you see there on the left-hand side will perish. There'll be no more food. If you look at the right-hand side, you will see a production fields surrounded and ringed by trees. Those trees produce ambient cooling, as we demonstrated. And if that happens, then the fields could be maintained 2 or 3 degrees cooler, which is all that it might take, the difference between food and no food. Next slide, please.
Reynold,
Yep.
we're starting to run out of time. If you could
All right,
just...
I'm almost done.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, this clipping over slides got tripped us up. Next one, please. This is what takes time.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. Well, hello.
Doesn't want to clip over at all.
Yeah. Well, it's not changing for us. It's not changing at all, actually, because I'm now coming to what can we do about it, which is a shame.
Scott, can you... Oh, here. Oh, good.
Okay, here we go. Okay, now, can these unpaid ecosystem services on farmers' land become a source of income? That is the question. Can we turn this around? A Sri Lankan company, Earth Restoration, has instituted a global first. Blockchain protected ledgers record the value of contracted primary ecosystem service transactions towards creating biocurrency value. A new movement is moving, and the movement basically is looking at biological productivity as having value and the ecosystem services to be harnessed for the help of the farming community. Next, please. I'm finishing 2 slides.
Thank you.
Yep. Now, the value of PES, primary ecosystem services, is now being realized by transacting measured amounts from farmers. The B2B ratio adds more value to it. And if you need more information on this, I'll give you the web page next. Please visit and take a look. This, I believe, is one of the new directions that we have to use if you're going to be paid for the huge job we have to do to retrofit our farms. Next slide, please. Mm-hmm.
Scott, the slide doesn't seem
Oh,
to...
that's it. Okay, then maybe it didn't come down. Yeah. Oh, here we go. Here we go. I was just giving all of you the useful contacts. If you want to know about analog forestry, our headquarters is in Costa Rica. That's the web. If you want to know more about primary ecosystem services and getting paid for PES and creating markets for PES and biocurrency, it is Restore Earth. And our training center for analog forestry, our international center actually, is now at bellipolarboretum.earth. These are the contacts. And if you are interested in any of the things that we presented, please get in touch. We'll be happy to send you more information. Thank you.
Reynold, thank you very much. And I think this is a very timely presentation, given that we're heading into COP26.
Yeah. Excuse me. COP26. One important thing. we are also doing the biodiversity copies coming up. Remember, all farmers, biodiversity means genes, species, and ecosystems. Article 8H of the CBD says exotic invasive species, but they do not talk about exotic invasive genes into the genome, which is what's happening with GMOs. They are not talking about exotic invasive ecosystems into the landscapes, which is what is happening with the monocultures.
It's a
Right.
very
Onwards.
good point. So thank you, Reynold.
Yeah,
And
onwards.
I really appreciate it. So now I'd like to hand over to Tilak.
Mm-hmm.
Tilak, can you put your camera on, please, so we can see you and your microphone? Can we unmute you, Tilak? Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry about I'm just at the road because I couldn't timely come into the place where I was expected. Very sorry about that. But I can contact from here. I can say that I don't use presentation, but I can do the what is happening in the country right now. I can
Thank you.
present it.
That's perfect. Actually, at the moment, we're having so much trouble with presentations. It's really good that you don't have one. So absolutely perfect, Tilak. Timing is great. So look, I'd just like to introduce you first because Tilak's another person I've known for a long time and I regard as a friend. And he's the president of the Lanka Organic Agricultural Movement, which is the main body for the organic sector in Sri Lanka. And Tilak is a member of the President's Advisory Group on Organic Agriculture. And he's also on the board of the National Organic Authority. And he's a member of the Sri Lankan Council of Agricultural Research. As well as that, he's been very active in setting up PGSs and, you know, I can say one of the major leaders in the movement. So, and Tilak has been very, very busy with other members of the Lanka Organic Agricultural Movement in working with the presidential directive on Sri Lanka becoming a fully organic country. So, Tilak, would you like to just talk to us and explain to everybody what is happening?
Thank you very much, Andre. Your the humble request to be present today, and thank you very much giving this opportunity as Regenerative International and the others who are co-organizers. And thank you very much, Dr. Anil, and giving the broader overview how we should go into the real meaning of organic agriculture. And sorry about my delay and all other things and being late. It is giving opportunity me to give little bit of the background what is happening in the country. As the thank you for the nice introduction gave by the Andre, and but you know, we always in the ground how to put in the things in the correct way of happening. And the after giving a presidential directives on 100% organic agriculture, which also meaning going for green economic and social uh, kind of era, and president want to do it in a organized manner. But what we understood as a organic movement, he didn't had a proper consultation and proper the kind of directions from his own government ministers and some of the government officials. Even the sector organization like LOM or the somebody like Dr. Ranil or some others. There are so many people who could be contributed to the correct directives, but they were not properly consulted. And even we were trying to bring the international the actors into the scene, but they were not really considering about what should be the way of doing it. And anyway, the still they are keeping their promises, and they are trying to stick with the 100% organic the promise. But there are some professors, there are some advisors who are giving advices to the ministers and the president, and they have identified first 46 people, and then again they were identified 25 people, and again now they are stick with the 14 people. And those are not really people who really understand what is organic agriculture, or the kind of the biodynamic or the permaculture or something really happening in around the world. And the some of these university professors are advising to the government, is saying, oh, there can be the organic compost bringing from somewhere outside, like China. It's 11% of nitrogen, and they are trying to bring some of the from the Kwandao province from China. There are seaweed based fertilizer, and we were telling about the if you the really going for a local production, that would be the benefited to the small farmers. That is what highly we are lobbying from the government, going to the get the farmers production. But these people are saying the chemical lobby is highly uh, happening in the country, because the sector organization called uh, crop life crop life is the central body to the chemical people, and they are indirectly the some of the university fellows and others are uh, the asking from they are behind from them. And those the some of the professional fellows are asking, oh, how can you go into the plantation crop converting to the organic agriculture, and where you can get that compost? They only think about compost is the only way of doing it. The we were repeatedly saying, the if you are building up your soil, you don't need that compost that much. You have some alternatives like liquid manure and some of the leguminous crops, and lot of things can be happen, but they are technically not sound, and they are just trying to get into somewhere the with the businesses, and that is sadly happening. And but we are trying to keep the government in the process, and therefore we are trying to get international support into this. And this could be one of the way where the government could keep them into the stick into their promises, and they it's need a lot of help, and also the technical facilitation. We also trying to train the government officers, because there are no extension package based on organic agriculture. Only still the chemical extension, the agriculture package is there. Other than that, there are no such organic type of the extension system. It is the main the drive of the this organic is not happening. And we also trying to bring these ideas into the policymakers, and we are organizing different level of the discussions, but it's still very hard to convince them. But what we were thinking, at least there are the ground level, there are farmers who was converted. The farmers are understanding what is the importance of the organic agriculture. At least the converted people, if we can keep with the organic agriculture, that could be our success story. And therefore we are trying to keep them with the way. But transitional people who were in the plantation sector and some others may be loose with the some of the chemical lobby. But the government the very strict, and they are not trying to bring the chemical fertilizer. But the some of the ministers are the going in the other direction, and they are just trying to bring different the what is called natural base the fertilizers, which are not recognized by the certification bodies. And with that, there is some difficulty to understand, even the any outsider comes, what is happening in the country. But we like Dr. Anil, ourselves, there are some others, we are trying to educate the youth and also the policy level people. And again, we have a hope the farmers will get understand the situation and try to the continue and what they have committed. And this is a kind of a unfortunate situation, but you can expect it if that is not properly the policy level decision has been taken, that can be happen. But our kind of a responsibility to keep going our work and without going away, and that is our kind of a prime responsibility, what Atula, myself, Dr. Anil, and most of others are doing. This is what is happening in the country. Just I want to brief on these things to you all to get kind of a idea. And again, some of the international actors like Chinese companies and some of the other companies are trying to sell the waste into Sri Lanka. That is also an unfortunate situation. Some of the international actors like Chinese authorities are pressurizing government to take some of the steps to import those the contaminated or the not clean fertilizer, which there are nanoparticles which are coming from the Indian the companies are trying to sell some of those things into Sri Lanka. There are many actors actually without responsibility, they are doing it, and it is a kind of unfortunate situation. But we need the Regenerative International and all other actors support, keep going this policy level lobby and the advocacy what we are doing in the country. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Tilak, thank you very much for the overview and showing that it's not an easy process, and we have to be careful that it does not get hijacked, and which unfortunately can be the case, but there is a lot of support. So what I'd like to do now is open it up for questions for both you and Reynold. The first one I have is to Reynold from Tasha Claus, and that is, what is the ratio of herbaceous to treed areas is best for maintaining water availability and cooling effects for farmland? Reynold, I think you're on. Yeah, you're on mute. Hang on, I'll try.
Sure. No, it absolutely. Yeah, a question like that is absolutely contextual. Why are you wanting to grow your trees? What kind of soils are you on? I mean, if you're on soils that take the water out very fast, then you have to build up trees with a large amount of carbon generating into the soil and a large root mass. If you are looking at the cooling effects, basically, the best way to do that is to look for the direction of wind. You know when your dry winds are coming, start planting your hedgerows, use the trees as part of your hedgerows, and that is the best sort of design. So wherever on the planet you are, whether you're in Ecuador or in Sri Lanka or India, thinking hedgerows is the best way to go. Because, and if your hedgerows follow your contours or your key lines, then you're onto a winner. But basically, beyond that, we have to look at your particular area, and then we can look at the species.
So Tasha also has another question, and how is this ratio affected by annual rainfall?
Well, if you have a high amount of annual rainfall, you have to get the water off your land. If you have a fairly low amount of annual rainfall, you have to retain. And that's what affects your building of the ratio.
Okay, now, sorry, I just got to get rid of the old question, sorry, and put the new one on. Let's see if I could try that. Okay, so I'll open up for both you and
Absolutely.
Ilak, which is from Joel, which is, I'd like to get more understanding about fossil agricultural production.
Well, Odom, Eugene Odom and H.P. Odom, University of Florida, they were the early people who did all the research on the amount of energy it takes to produce food. They looked at a whole range of foods, and that's where I would send you to first. Read up Odom, both brothers, Eugene and H.P., right? And then from there on, the countries are now starting, like I showed you with my graph, people are now starting to evaluate how much of fossil goes into producing our food. But for the basic understanding of how this is done, my recommendation is Merrill's Radical Agriculture and Odom.
Thank you. Now, Tilak, I'd like to ask you a question.
Yeah.
If you're still, and that is, what can we, who are outside of Sri Lanka, do to support you in your, like you say, journey or struggle for Sri Lanka to become 100% organic country?
Yeah, well, that is the first thing what we were understood according to this situation. Now we have to educate, properly educate the policymakers and giving an overview about what is the requirement of the if it is organic, what are the requirements? Because what we does the not enough, and to get understanding to the government officials, because they are not in a position, because they only learn the chemical agriculture in their life, and they don't know how the policy decisions or the extension part could be done. And if they are the authority, and if they are the people who should do, and there are no the university research are happening, even though I am sitting in the agriculture research council, the only for a year we are helping 5 to 6 the research which are for whole country. You see how the nearly the 600 out of research, you get only 6 to 7 the research on only organic, and that is where the you can see how the interest goes. And apart from these things, and what we want to get from the international community, because the well understood the people like Dr. Anil and some others are there, but the amount of work we to do, it's huge, and therefore we need to have a few training centers, continuous training centers, where the government official could be trained and bring them into the farmers field and convert into the real organic agriculture, instead of the so-called the ecological or chemical, without chemical agriculture is not going to address the ground level issues, because there are so many the self-claim organic fellows, but they are not addressing to the bigger issue what we were talking about.
May I just input a little bit here?
Certainly.
What you could do, what the international committee, especially IFORM and the certification agencies can do to help us, is to declare that contaminated substances like this new soil that they're importing, soils cannot be brought in, it's against the law. It's against the phytosanitary regulations. So what we say is any estate or any group that applies this stuff cannot be certified. The moment you do that, you'll get the tea guys backing off, because you're going to say, hey, you put this garbage on your soil, this garbage tested, there's all this stuff that's come out now that there's pathogenic organisms in it, right? You apply that stuff and you are decertified if you're certified, or you cannot be certified because you've now poisoned your soil, contaminated your soil. So if you guys can take an international stand like that and push it, that would be the way that we can get something done here.
Okay, thank you. Another question for you, Reynold. Can you enlighten us how carbon credits can be available for agro-reforestation work?
Donna, I'm sorry to tell you that carbon trading is a scam. You see, there's no way that we can tie up fossil carbon in a tree. Fossil carbon is 200 million years old. When a tree can only live for, at the max, maybe 1,000 years, there's no comparison between 1,000 and 200 million. You cannot lock something that you've released that is 200 million years old into a tree, and when the tree dies, that carbon goes back into the atmosphere. It's a scam. Having said that, there is a huge amount of money floating around now for tree planting and all that stuff. Do it, take it, but be very aware that it is not going to make a jot of difference to the fossil that we are burning and putting into the atmosphere.
And then talking about that, can a presentation be organized to show relevant authorities how regenerative food production is essential to the food production of local ecology?
Sure. I mean, scientifically and logically, a real common sense approach should be done and could be done. Absolutely.
All right. So I suppose the other question I'd like to ask, and that's both to you and Tilak. Tilak, you mentioned about the fact that what is really needed is farmer training, and I couldn't agree more. I think that's the basis of, if we want to scale up our systems, we have to have farmer training. So if you want to talk to it, and also Reynold, considering that you're an expert in education, if you could also talk about your thoughts on that. But Tilak, would you like to talk about what you see? Still there? We've lost you. Tilak?
Yeah, sorry.
Lost you again.
Can you repeat it?
Farmer training again.
Yeah, oh, right. Yeah. So there are the normally extension service is provided by the government. The supposed all the paddy and the some of the other there are two section of extension, because there are three institutions actually, mainly government side providing extension in the special areas called the Mahavali mean there are few rivers has been diverted, and also the irrigation schemes, and those are call it Mahavali schemes. All that schemes having their own the Mahavali, there is a separate ministry for that. They have their own type of the extension system, and those people can only get that extension from the Mahavali authority. And from the outside farmers from that areas, there are two institutions. One is agriculture department, other one is the agrarian service department. There are two different institutions who get into this. What we have done, there are the smallholder tea farmers, and that is handled by the tea smallholders authority. And there are rubber development department, and it is handled by separate the department. And therefore there is a need from the ground level, because these different institutions don't have the kind of skills who can train into bring it them into the organic farmers. There are the NGOs and some other institutions, also the private companies are doing the who are exporting organic and doing extension service. That is not that much enough, because it is just about the around 5% what we does. And therefore huge need is there to cater into that. And we need a kind of the bottom up approach, where immediately these farmers can train. The top of that, the extension system has to be the maintained. Therefore the government officers has to be trained, and those are the two needs we immediately having. The right now, myself, Atula, and Dr. Anil, we continuously go into the field and we do the trainings. But we understood the services, we are the we can't meet that need. The so much need is there.
Look, thank you, Tilak.
Andre, I could give you some
So,
input here also.
we'll
Yeah,
have time's
we
up
have.
now for the session. So
Okay, if you want, Andre, we
Yeah.
are just setting up with the NIBM, the National Institute of Business Management, who's got a course in organic agriculture, which just started now.
Okay.
We got the VTA, the Vocational Training Institute. We've got a level 5 training, which is just about to come out on analog forestry, where organic agriculture is the base of it. They got to start with that. So we've got two things going there. And we've got Belipula Training Center, our own, up in Mirahavata, which is also open to students from all over the world. So we've got these things, but I think this have to be replicated over and over again, all over in different environments.
Yeah. Look, and you're exactly right, Reynold. I think education is just so important, but I'm really pleased to hear how much you're doing in Sri Lanka. So thank you very much, both of you, for this session on organic Sri Lanka. And you can be assured we're going to get you as much support as we can. It's a really important project. And
thank you very much, Andre, and the Ayubo and Namaste from Sri Lanka.
Okay, thank you, guys. And now I'd like to introduce another friend, a very dear friend of mine, Dr. Vandana Shiva. And Dr. Shiva is probably one of the most important activists we have on our planet. She's got her doctorate in quantum physics, but I think her real doctorate is in the natural world and the real world and understanding how natural systems work. She wrote probably one of the most influential books ever, The Violence of the Green Revolution, which woke everybody up to the dangers of industrial agriculture. She's been awarded what many of us will call the real Nobel Prize, the Right Livelihood Award, Sydney Peace Prize, and many others. She's written actually a lot of books, and her most recent one is 1% versus the oneness, showing how it was actually really less than 1%. A handful of billionaires really control most of this planet, and corruptly so. And it's a very important issue. And she is one of the original founders of Regeneration International and the global regeneration movement, as well as that being one of the long-time advocates of organic agriculture. So, Vandana, I'll hand it to you now. It's all yours.
Hello, Andre. Yes, Andre laid out the long journey I've had. I thought my journey would be in quantum theory. And since the most brilliant minds had spent a whole century puzzling about the quanta, it could occupy my life. But more of my life has been occupied by solving the puzzles of industrial agriculture and finding the path for non-violent farming. It began really with the farmers' protests in Punjab in 1984. That's when I wrote the book Green Revolution, or The Violence of the Green Revolution, for the United Nations University, because I was working on conflicts for the UNU program on peace and global transformation. But all the narrative was only about religion, just as much as the contemporary farmers' protests they're trying desperately to reduce it to religion. But this was really about land. It was about soil. It was about fairness and justice. And as one of the declarations of that time said, when you cannot choose what you'll grow, you cannot decide how you'll grow it, you cannot determine when the waters of your own rivers, Punjab, the land of 5 rivers, when that water will reach your field, because green revolution goes hand in hand with centralized control over water systems through large dams and irrigation, because chemical agriculture uses 10 times more water to produce the same amount of food. So there has to be a lot of diversion of water, a lot of extraction of water. And the fact that we today have a water crisis is so linked to the green revolution and industrial agriculture. So the farmers were saying, you can't decide the price of what you've grown. No other industry does the producer not decide the price. This is slavery. So they saw the green revolution as slavery and were rising against it. That was 84. We've had farmers rising throughout history. And in fact, if we wrote the true history of the evolution of societies, it would not be the history of kings and queens. It would be the history of people of the land, the indigenous people, the peasants, the farmers. At least in my country, for sure, you can't write the history without the 1857 uprising of peasants. The British prefer to call it the Sepoy Mutiny. No, it was much deeper. And the symbol was bread. People were giving bread to each other as a symbol of freedom. And for us, our bread has always been our freedom. So what was the Green Revolution? The Green Revolution was not green in content. It was not green in process. The word green as a color of the green parties of the world is a much later phenomenon. At that time, green was just a different color from red. And the big panic, of course, was the rise of China, as is still the big panic in the world. So the Green Revolution was a name given to really the continuity of war from Hitler's Germany. And that's what I found out when I wrote The Green Revolution. And since then, have found out more and more and more in my book, Oneness versus 1%, that Andre cited, goes deeper into it. So here were the Allied forces, and here were the, Hitler's Germany, but the companies were working together. Standard Oil, the big American monopoly on oil, was supplying finance because they started the finance system too and the banking system too, and the pharmaceutical industry, but definitely the fossil fuel industry. And they were working with IT Farben, which was the cartel from Germany. And together they were working in Auschwitz. So the original chemicals were designed to kill human beings. And that they still continue to kill human beings is not an accident. So 1984, the Punjab crisis was erupting, but that same year the Bhopal disaster took place. More than 7,000 people died when a pesticide plant of Union Carbide leaked. Since then, Carbide was bought up by Dow. Dow has merged with DuPont, and they've given themselves a beautiful name called Corteva. If you were to listen to their names, you would really think they're arising from the earth. 87, I realized that they were now wanting to own the seed. They said it at a meeting on the laws of life in Geneva, on the new emerging biotechnologies. Now, 87 there was no commodity that was genetically modified. The idea of recombinant DNA was there, but the scientists who evolved it said, we don't know the consequences. We don't know the ethical implications. We don't know the ecological implications. So we're going to put a moratorium. They stopped it. And then the poison cartel, as I call it, took this tool of moving genes across species and tried very hard for many years. And through this, a war industry, Monsanto became the leading seed corporation. And then they had to be bought by Bayer. So now you have 4 corporations: Bayer with Monsanto, Syngenta, which is already a merger of Ciba, Sandoz, AstraZeneca. And in addition to that, you have BASF, which was part of the original. And you have Dow DuPont, which is now Corteva, 4 companies controlling 60% of the commercial seed market. And that's what really started me on saving seeds and started Navdanya in the process. Now, 2 things started to become very clear in the study of the Green Revolution, as well as in the understanding of the patenting of seed and genetic modification, that there is this arrogance of capitalist patriarchs, which is the corporations. Corporations are the patriarchs. They're modeled on the image of a rich bourgeois man. And they behave like dominant patriarchs. But when greed and patriarchal domination combine, then new toxic things start to happen. And what they created was what I call a creation boundary. So nature has created the plants around us. And if Andre hasn't mentioned this, I want to mention to all of you, just the other day, a release was done, or maybe, yeah, the release was done and the book will be available on the 22nd. Brilliant book called Growing Life, which all of us should read. I see it as the most significant leap in our thinking. In Growing Life, Andre points out that the photosynthesis, the chlorophyll molecule in the leaf, which can capture the sunlight and take the carbon dioxide and turn it into carbohydrate, which Andre calls the molecule of life, and also in the process give us oxygen to breathe. That miracle technology is really the basis of life on Earth, and it is the reason we live on a planet, or we evolved on a planet as a species and have a climate that allows us to sustain ourselves. This wasn't the climate of this planet before plants came, before photosynthesis came. It used to be 290 degrees, 4,000 parts per million of carbon dioxide. And the power of photosynthesis is what allowed the planet to cool to 13 degrees average, to bring the carbon dioxide concentration down to 270. And of course, we've messed it up because 200 years ago, coal started to drive the British Empire, and 100 years ago, oil started to drive the American Empire, with Standard Oil leading the whole thing. And so much of the history of this world and the geography of this world is shaped by oil. The entire country formation in the Middle East and the continued wars are really oil wars. Most people don't know that every chemical in agriculture is a petrochemical. All chemicals in agriculture come from the extermination logic of Hitler's Germany, of IG Farben. They were tried in Nuremberg. They were tried for crimes against humanity. And those crimes haven't stopped. Those crimes have expanded to be crimes against nature, because once you take war chemicals from the concentration camps and deploy them across the world in an agriculture that you call improved agriculture, modern agriculture, is basically war agriculture, then these chemicals are everywhere. And that's why 90% of the insects have disappeared. The biodiversity of our plants have disappeared, because when you put an external input, like synthetic fertilizers, when we feed the soil organic matter, and that is what regenerative agriculture is, the soil's brilliance and intelligence works out exactly how the mycorrhizal fungi will pull minerals from miles away from where they are and feed it to the plant. That intelligence of the living soil is what is destroyed, first denied by saying the soil is an empty container for pouring nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. But what is the result we have? Soils have been depleted of their nutrients. The figures for India are so clear. We have lost the ability to produce food because of chemical synthetic fertilizers. And 1 kilogram of synthetic fertilizers uses 2 liters of diesel. And it's created by burning fossil fuel at very high temperature. So when the Green Revolution was at its peak, the fertilizer use for 1 kilogram of fertilizer produced 13 kilograms of grain. By 2005, you needed you used 1 kilogram to produce 3.7. So your productivity of fertilizer has dropped from 13.4 to 7. And this is happening because the soil organisms are being destroyed. That's how the graph is going. And we still keep getting told we can't feed the world without chemical fertilizers. This is the reality, because it's the soil food web that really feeds us. How is the soil created? By taking that carbon dioxide of the atmosphere through photosynthesis, putting it back into the soil through its leaves and compost, through its liquid carbon pathway. Amazing research being done around the world. So regenerative agriculture really is understanding the regenerative process of the earth herself, because everything in nature is circular. Everything in nature is regenerative. Everything in nature is creative. And capitalist patriarchy has created this illusion that creation begins when nitrogen is made, nitrogen fertilizers are made and poured into the soil. And they deny the destruction, but they deny the creativity of the soil. They deny the creativity of the small farmers, of being more productive. All the data of the FAO is showing that 80% of the food we eat comes from small farms. Only 20% comes from industrial farms, which are occupying about 75% of the land. And if they have their way, they will destroy every forest for GMO soya, the Indonesian forest for palm oil, the Congo for palm oil, and more people will starve and we will have more climate havoc. My own research shows that 80%, that 50% of the greenhouse gases come from the full system of food production and distribution. The production is 14%. The destruction of forest, land use change, they call it, is about 20%. And then taking good food and turning it into junk, ultra-processed food that gives us chronic diseases. Packaging that's tearing down our mountains, our sacred mountains, like Niyamgiri. Mining for bauxite. The biggest use of aluminium today is not on automobiles. It is not aeroplanes. It is food packaging, which is why we get mountains. I did an archaeological analysis of garbage dumps one day and found 75% of what's there is either throwaway food or packaging of bad food. We are destroying the earth for industrial agriculture. If you just take the sums together, 75% soil and water destruction, 50% greenhouse gases, 75% chronic diseases, and all amazing new diseases we've never heard of, the Ebolas and the HIVs, all because agribusiness encroached into forests. We have another way of knowing nature, understanding nature, working with her laws. What are the laws of ecology in agriculture? Albert Howard laid it out so clearly. The first law is biodiversity. As he said, how come in Asia farmers could farm the same piece of land for 40 centuries? How come in Australia the Aboriginal people could farm a whole continent and not destroy it for 60 centuries? We are talking about the brilliance of the peasantry, of the farmers, of the forest people. And even these lines and separations are so artificial. For the Aboriginal people of Australia, the bush and the farm were one continuum. And they managed it so that you didn't have the kind of forest fires you have today. For the Amazon Indians, the forest and their farms were a continuum. For India, the forest and the farm was one continuum. Our forests were on our farm. And we are currently doing a study on the ecological functions of agroforestry and farm trees. And I'm so glad just before this session, you had Ranil and Tilak from Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is one more country that is trying to make a transition. And of course, on everything where there's an organic initiative, there's attack. But all we have to see is when the supply chains of fossil fuels and fertilizers were stopped for Cuba, Cuba made an immediate shift to a regenerative agriculture. And in that shift, they showed that you can grow food without fertilizers, without fossil fuels. Most of humanity's history has been growing food without fossil fuels and petrochemicals. The future of agriculture is growing food without petrochemicals and without fossil fuels. The energy efficiency is so huge. 10 units of input to produce 1 unit of bad food in industrial farming. In industrial factory farming, 100 units of input to produce 1 unit of food. And if you were to add to that the ultra processing in the lab-based fake food that the Silicon Valley billionaires who are controlling the well, they're the 0.001%, they now are so hungry. They are so desperately hungry. They want our food. And regenerative agriculture has now also to include not just how we grow our food, but also how we process it. Because Bayer is already ready and saying, oh, this new emerging plant-based industry, they need a lot of raw materials of carbohydrates and proteins and amino acids. And we are perfectly matched to grow it because we do row crops. And we can mechanize even more and supply them at scale. First, they said the soil is an empty container. Now they're saying food is raw material. And every step of distancing from the soil to the eater worsens the quality of food. That is why we call it a degenerative system. And the contrary is the regenerative system, in which we work more closely with the earth, more closely with our plants, more intensely with care, and the eater and the producer, the grower and the eater, are part of one food community, because food is a commons. So what the regenerative movement is showing, that when you feed the soil organisms actually produce more food for you. Johnson's work is showing you can increase photosynthesis 5-fold. Photosynthesis is converting the carbon dioxide and the sun's energy into available food. And not just food for us, food for all beings, because as I always see, food is the currency of life. Every being provides food to other beings, but more than that, every being has a right to food. We don't have a right to kill the butterflies and bees with pesticides. We don't have a right to kill the earthworms and the mycorrhizal fungi with fertilizers. We don't have a right to destroy ocean life with dead zones, as 90% of the fertilizer runs off into the oceans as waste. Our soils have increased their carbon content 100% in the last 20 years, just in our valley, in Doon Valley. And the nitrogen content in soils where we did not apply nitrogen fertilizers has gone up 100%. It has gone down 22% in the chemically farmed soils. But this is the issue, that actually what's being produced in these giant-sized monocultures with soil getting no nourishment is nutritionally empty commodities measured only in terms of their dimension. I call it Descartes' ultimate victory, the size and the weight. But food is content, quality. What's the nourishment in it? And the micronutrients matter. And the micronutrients are put in food through our collaborative partners in the soil. Our zinc content has gone up 14%, but the zinc has gone down in chemical soils by 37%. Manganese has gone up 14% in our soils, gone down 17%. 12% loss in iron. Overall studies are showing as much as 75 to 90% nutrient loss in industrially produced food. So it is time to stop measuring yield. It is time to start measuring nutrition per acre. And that's what we did in Navdanya. Because I was so troubled by what I saw in the state of Punjab, monocultures of rice in one season and monocultures of wheat in another season. And the more your monocultures are, the more chemically fertilized your plants are, the more vulnerable to pests they will be, more pesticides you will use. And now there's a cancer train that leaves Punjab for the city of Bikaner for treatment for cancer. That has been the legacy of the Green Revolution. And for our friends who will join from Africa, where the Alliance for the Green Revolution experiment is repeating the disaster that was created by Rockefeller already from the 60s in India, we need to connect both the costs to the earth and to farmers in India and the cost to the earth and farmers in Africa. And that's where I believe this People's Food Summit is so very important, as sowing the seeds of a new solidarity. Sowing the seeds of a new solidarity, not just between all of us across the world who have gathered, but a new solidarity with the earth. I've just written a paper for World Food Day on the living earth and climate change, because the same processes of photosynthesis that allow us to grow more food are processes that have already allowed the earth to cool the planet. And if we intensify photosynthesis, we intensify biological production, we intensify biodiversity, we draw down more carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and cool the planet. But we do it while growing more nourishing food for people and for all beings. We have the common solution for both hunger and the climate catastrophe. But those who are hungry for profits and want to control our food system and tried to hijack the decision-making by hijacking the UN Food Summit. The UN Food Summit used to be in Rome, used to be organized by the United Nations, a country has one vote. The small island nations to the Himalayan countries each has as much vote as the Americans, which is why they have never been able to destroy the FAO on the basis of the one country, one vote principle. This hijack to New York, with it being headed by the Gates head of the Alliance for the Green Revolution project, Agnes Kalibata, and sessions by CropLife. CropLife is just the other marketing name for the poison cartel. They know no plants, they know no crops, they definitely don't know life, they're anti-life. And I would call the Gates Food Summit as the anti-UN, anti-food summit. Anti-UN because it has destroyed the very democratic fabric of international governance. And anti-food because it is destroying the very basis, the very ontology of food as the living medium of life, as the web that weaves the web of life. Food is what flows from the soil to the plants to us. As Howard said, health is a continuum from the soil to the plants to animals, including humans. We now know. We knew it in ancient times. We knew it through Ayurveda, the science of life. But now, in 10 years, emerging science is recognizing that the gut microbiome is a very rich biodiverse ecosystem. And it is connected to the earth and the biodiversity outside. We have 100 trillion fellow beings in us. We are only 10% human cells. And those fellow beings know when we pump glyphosate and Roundup and they get harmed. They know when we are feeding the same molecule of gluten from uniformly bred wheat and you get gluten allergy. Our native wheats do not cause gluten allergy. And even Monsanto tried to patent our wheats and we had to fight that biopiracy and they had to leave the patent. They wanted a market because every third third person in an industrial agriculture food system has gluten allergy. It is the harm we are doing to food, is the harm that we're doing to soil, and the harm we are doing to the gut microbiome is one harm. It's one violence, it's one war. What regeneration is doing is one piece. One common piece with the earth, all the amazing soil microbiomes, the amazing insects who know how to manage each other when we leave them to have a pest-predator balance, when we grow biodiversity so they can feed it. You know, I was not even working on insects. I was just saving seeds. But to save seeds, and we are harvesting 750 varieties of rice at the Navdanya farm right now. We have another 1,082 in our seed bank in Orissa, salt-resistant, flood-resistant, drought-resistant rices, which since 1999 we've been distributing after every cyclone, every flood, the tsunami. So it's not the case that we don't have climate resilient seeds and we need Gates and we need Bayer and we need Monsanto. They just pirate these seeds. This is piracy of climate resilience, and then they patent it. But piracy has been the mode of colonialism. They cannot. They pretend they are the creators, but they are just the pirates. In the first colonial time, they called themselves pirates, pirates of Penzance. Now, they pretend to be philanthropists. It's a new form of piracy, taking all the seed banks of the world. Gates has taken control. That's why we must have community seed banks. They would like to take control of agriculture. Gates has one agriculture model for the whole world. We have to create thousands, building on our traditions. In the mountains, we have to have terraces. In the desert, we have to have lots of shade trees. Every part of this planet is diverse, and it thrives on diversity. The laws of agroecology, the laws of regenerative farming are diversity and the law of return. That's what Howard recognized when he came to India and found how rich the farming was. And he said, how can I improve this? I must turn the Indian peasant into my professor. We have to turn the earth, her processes, her biodiversity, the peasants, into our professors. And leading this has to be indigenous peasants, small farmers, and women. Women, because even when the men were dragged out into the mines and the plantations, the women kept growing food. Men were pulled into wars. The gardens kept growing. The bread kept coming. And the history of food is the history of women. The history of seed is the history of women. The erasure of nature's creativity and the erasure of women's creativity is capitalist patriarchy. But no matter how much they deny it, they cannot extinguish it. And this is what is helping the regeneration today. We are in a very, very exciting moment. We are in an exciting moment because precisely at the time where the poison cartel and the billionaires and the World Economic Forums are riding triumphant, they think their systems are totally collapsing. Just two simple little good news is today, which we should celebrate on World Food Day. Bayer threatened Mexico, which had decided it would not accept GMO corn because corn is their heritage. They are the country of corn. They gave us thousands of varieties of corn. Bayer challenged it. They appealed. The Supreme Court just ruled unanimously that they will not accept GMO corn because it undermines their heritage. And the law on corn as a heritage, which is a cultural law, came into play. Food is culture. How we eat differs in every part of the world. The second really good news I read today was, we have an amazing network of women who take care of women's health and children's health. They call Ashas, which also means hope. And as is typical of poor Mr. Bill Gates, who wants to sell his software everywhere, he with World Bank created a program where the women would be given smartphones and would be documenting all their visits. And at the end of it, these women said, we are spending all our time reporting to you and spending no time looking after the children. The babies are dying of hunger. Women can't be looked after. We want to give care. We don't want your gadget. And they had a campaign to return the phones, and the digital empire was told no. This is a contemporary satyagraha against digital empire of nutrition. Satyagraha is Gandhi's word for the force of truth. Satya, truth. Agra, the force of truth. What we are working with in regeneration is the force of truth of the earth, the force of truth of the seed, the force of truth of the soil, the force of truth of the sunshine, the force of truth of photosynthesis, the force of truth of 100 trillion microbes in our gut, the force of truth of our ancestors, and the force of truth for our future generations. This is why it's an exciting moment, because all we have to do is continue to do the right thing. And those castles in the sand are going to collapse. Those satellites will have no one to send signals to. So keep taking care of your garden. Keep taking care of your seed. Keep taking care of your community. And in solidarity, we will go seed by seed, garden by garden, farm by farm, community by community, country by country. I send you loving wishes. Thank you.
Well, Vandana, always such wonderful, inspiring words. So I'd like to just have a question time for the last part of this session. And I'd like to start just asking you about what I regard as one of the most important books you've written, Health Per Acre, because for me, when I read that was a game changer. Instead of just talking about kilograms per hectare, to actually talk about the actual nutrition produced per acre or per hectare instead of yields or empty calories. And in that book, you showed that diverse smallholder farms could feed 2 Indias. Would you like to talk on that? Because I think this is a really important issue we need to change the paradigm of.
Yeah. So when I studied the Green Revolution, I realized 2 things. One, that food production wasn't being increased. What had happened is a system of biodiverse agriculture, and Punjab used to grow 250 species of crops till the Green Revolution rice and the Green Revolution wheat was forced on them. But because chemicals caused lodging, the warlord was given the task of changing the plant to be resilient to chemicals. And therefore they reduced the straw, which is the food of the earth. It is the food of animals, yeah? They took away the biomass that feeds the regenerative cycles. And basically all they did was increase the partitioning. It wasn't an overall increase in the biomass of even one plant. So they took a system, reduced it to one plant, took a plant, reduced it to one part, and said, we grew more. No, there was not increased biomass. There wasn't increased food production. It was just a higher ability to sell more chemicals and a higher extraction of a commodity. So they basically reduced a food system to a commodity. And I noticed this in 84. So I started to then say, but our farming systems have so much diversity, and I'm going to measure biodiversity. So I evolved from 95 onwards. I started to go farm to farm, and we did 200 farm study on the biodiversity-based productivity, biodiversity-based productivity, and we called it a new paradigm for food security and food safety. And here, these 200 farm productivity, what we did later, when I was very privileged to have a colleague who volunteered with us, a doctor who's just become a surgeon, and Dr. Vaibhav Singh, he dropped into my office and said, I want to work with you. And I said, in your background? He said, I'm a doctor, I'm an MBBS. I said, what are your passions? He said, math and public health. I said, I got the perfect task for you. You will take the productivity tables of the biodiversity and convert them into nutrition tables. Now that's a lot of work. Only if you love math and you love public health can you do it. So what we did, we took the productivity data from the biodiversity-based productivity and then converted it into nutrition tables. And let me just share with you. Let me give you one example. So a comparative analysis of one farm. So we have millets, we have Mandua, Jangora, Gehet, Bhat. These are all local names of millets and indigenous beans. And they are producing a total of 14 quintals. The paddy is producing 12. So overall, it's producing much less. But then you break down into the individual proteins. So the proteins are 338 compared to 90 in the case of paddy. The carotene, they're after golden rice in Philippines. We sent it out in the year 2000. They first brought it to India. We said, no, you don't need this. There's so much source of beta carotene. Beta carotene is 2,540 in these biodiverse systems, just 24. This is where the malnutrition is going. It grows from the soil, but also from the farm that your plants are not biodiverse. A Sikkim study, 9 units of production in a mixed farm with maize as one component. But the maize is 4 units in the 9. They take the maize, make it a monoculture. They take what was in a mixed farm, 4 units, make it 5 units in a monoculture with lots of chemicals. But meantime, you have lost 5 units of protein crops and nutritious vegetables. So I call this the monoculture of the mind that is so blind to diversity that it cannot really see the system that it's growing. And then we extrapolated on the basis of the data to all of India's farming. We took averages of these 200 farms and said, if all of India cultivated with biodiversity, how much iron would we have? How much protein would we have? And that's where we realized not only can we feed 2 times India with the level of malnutrition we are facing, but with rich nutrition, and in some cases have enough for 5 billion people. So if the world shifted to first more photosynthesis and the molecule of life, second, biodiversity intensification and the biodiversity functions of plants rather than the petrochemicals destroying those biodiversity functions, third, more justice in our food distribution system, more fairness, more diversity in distribution, we can literally increase farmers' incomes tenfold, increase food availability to double. We could feed 14 times. We could feed 14 billion and retreat from the Amazon, retreat from the Indonesian rainforest. And we don't need to destroy the planet for the hunger of corporations. The earth has very limited appetite and a generative appetite. Small peasants have generative agriculture. Communities have generative economies. And this amazing paradigm shift that we are all making is unstoppable.
Well, thank you for those wonderful comments again. I have a comment from one of the participants, Doug Ravel, and he says we need to live in harmony with the soil food web. Nature is circular, nature is regenerative, and nature knows how to grow nutritious and sustainable foods. So I know you've been talking on that. Would you like to just elaborate on this, which I think is a very important comment, and the concept of oneness?
The concept of oneness, the concept of regeneration, and the concept of circularity. So the concept of oneness shows that you cannot separate the soil microorganism from plant health. You cannot separate plant health from our health. And you know, when they say plant-based foods, well, all foods are plant-based, all. It begins with the green leaf. Life is plant-based. So it is about oneness, and the flow is the nutrition. The whole issue of balance. You know, the new sciences are teaching us, the science of living systems is teaching us that living systems from this microbe, the cell, the molecule, to organisms, to the planet as a whole, Gaia as a whole, are self-organized systems. And in self-organized systems, what you have is harmony. And how is that harmony maintained? Because every organism is intelligent and it knows how much to take and how much to give. It knows how much to give because it cares for others in relationship. And it knows how much to take because it knows how to keep toxics and overdoses out. That's why every living system has a membrane. And that is the reason I have been against globalization, which tears down the membrane of national economies. It tears down the membrane of local economies. Every living system has membranes and an exchange. They are not insular. The third very important point is circular. So things circulate. You know, I think, Andre, the next step we need is how from the soil through the plant to photosynthesis and back from photosynthesis back to the soil is a circular economy of life. And we're just touching the surface of it right now. It is such an amazing circular economy. Now, just like the reductionist monoculture of the mind only looked at the commodities that go to the market and then said we are growing more, the economy itself, by being extractive and only looking at commodities, treated extraction as growth. When by disrupting the circular system, you are depriving the living system of its growth. You're depriving the soil of its fertility and growth. You're depriving the plant of its growth. You're depriving the rural communities of their growth. Why are rural communities sinking into debt and poverty? Because of the extractive system. The current industrial agriculture model is based on extraction by high costs of inputs. That's the first extraction. That's the debt. The second is extraction in terms of the share of the farmer that would stay with the farmer in a fair economy. So-called free trade is legalizing unfairness and injustice. The third is every step in the industrial system is an extraction of the resources of the land, of water, of genes, of seeds, of biodiversity. So this extractive system cannot see circularity. In fact, it must rupture the circles in order to pull out more. It sees giving back to the soil as a waste of organic matter. And look at the literature. You know, in my land of the sacred cow, they're now talking of bullocks as waste animals. Can you imagine? Just because we've got industrialized now, so dairy can be industrialized, but the tractor needs to get rid of the bullock. But in India, we just like the grain and the straw was part of one whole biological system. The male and the female in every offspring is equally valuable. So we fought feticide, female feticide, because they wanted to get rid of they created technologies to get rid of female fetuses. Now they're creating technologies to get rid of male fetuses in animals. I've done studies on the factory farm system. They kill male chicks when they're born because they won't lay eggs. They just gas them to death. The violence of the factory farming system is then extrapolated to the non-violent relationship of pastoral economies and economies of a balanced relationship between cattle herders, the land, the soil, the animals. So this is another place where we have to work. So the circular economy is the economy of the future. And the circular economy is not Coca-Cola drowning the planet in Coca-Cola bottles and then sending it to waste treatment plants. Circular means it must circulate in the life process. Anything that might get recycled into new raw material for the new profit chain is not circularity. Circularity is a living process. It must fit right back. I think Reynold was saying it in terms of the million years of fossilization of carbon. You can't equate it with the living carbon in the tree. And I think it's these ontological, like I say, if you want to eat meat, eat meat. You don't want to eat meat, don't eat an Impossible Burger that tastes like meat. They've tried to feed me as a vegetarian, chicken that looks, soya chicken that looks like chicken. I said, I don't want it, I'll have my dal, please. So I think it's a moment of truth to ourselves because we are what we eat. So circularity is the flow of the nutrition of life. And that's why I say food is the currency of life. And the food revolution is the revolution of life, where we will ally ourselves with the laws of the earth. And the power of this planet and the power of Gaia is so much bigger than the power of these pathetic billionaires. That is where we must cultivate our own inner strength and our hope.
So, talking about that, I've got a very good question. I actually think, Tasha, I think you stayed up all night looking at this. So she says, I live in the California Central Valley, essentially the belly of the beast of industrial agriculture. How do I increase the reach of my voice to be heard by our state and local officials? And I think that's a really important question.
Thank you, Tasha. And one of my last trips before lockdown was through the Central Valley. I was giving lectures in Northern California and then in Southern California, and I had to drive through the Central Valley. So when you say, how do I change systems? I think there are initiatives right now in California where public health people are connecting to the food issue. Because now doctors realize it begins in food. All chronic diseases begin in food. And I personally know so many cancer specialists who've given up their practices in the city and started organic farms. And they say, come here for treatment. Outside New York, there's a famous doctor. I know there's the most famous Italian cancer specialist, runs an organic farm now. So work with local public health people. The second is during lockdown, where people lost jobs. people started to create gardens and solidarity groups, including in the poor communities. I think particularly in your area, you have a very, very unique solidarity to create, because you are one of the largest population of farm workers who are treated very unjustly. And I think a new solidarity between small, because there's always an attempt to divide. The 1% is always ruled by divide and rule. And they will pit, they'll say, oh, the small organic farmer is your enemy. Yeah. Now, we have to have a small organic farmers, farm workers, public health people, those feeding poor communities, because I was reading in England, for every supermarket, there are now 10 voluntary feeding programs, because most people can't even afford to buy the subsidized and artificially cheap food of the supermarkets. People can only get food because there's a solidarity of food kitchens and soup kitchens. So this solidarity that is emerging through hunger is another alliance, a solidarity emerging through justice to farm workers, and a new solidarity. When in that trip, I was invited by the mayor of Los Angeles, and he said, my biggest problem is homeless people. I said, don't see it as a problem, see it as them creating health for your city. All you have to do is design places where they can work with the soil, heal the earth. They'll be climate warriors. They'll give healthy food. They'll have shelter. And instead of having a problem in a mega city, you'll have a solution to all the mega problems. And because you're in California and in the belly of the beast, the belly of the beast is a good place to take small steps.
Well, Vandana, I just want to thank you so much. Your words have, as usual, been so inspiring, so informative, and the amount of positive comments we've got is unbelievable. It's been, for me anyway, it's been the highlight of about 8 hours, more than 8 hours of doing this. So, yeah, it's been wonderful, and I just want to thank you and just say to everybody, we'll close it off now, because in a few minutes, Africa will start. Africa, Europe, and the Middle East, and those speakers. So have a little bit of a break and hang around. We've still got Africa, Europe, Latin America, and North America to go. So we've done about half the world almost. So for me, it's good night, and thank you so much, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much, Andre.
And thank you, Vandana, and thank you, everybody, for being here. I hope you enjoy the rest of the show.